him.
The thing about a gangster or an enforcer is they prey on you. They see you, they prey on you, they'll put money in your pocket, they'll be nice to you, and then they'll make you do things. They'll make you do things.
Most firms have got to have somebody on them who's willing to be violent or even go as far as to kill someone.
Cutting. Right down there. Oh, so thick. You could put your finger in it. Cut them lovely, all round. Try to do one or two eyes if you can at the same time. So you'd even blinded and all if necessary.
Years ago it would have cost you 10, 20 grand to have someone killed. Now you can get it done for 5.
They just make you vanish. You never hear, you know, they just take you out. You know, you might make a meet in a pub with them and you're never seen again.
Police say I've killed many men. I ain't arguing with them.
You know when you see a guy and he looks at you and you know that he can hurt you. It's nothing to do with muscles or fucking how big he is. It's that haggard look in his eye. That when you look through his eyes and you see nothing, all that you see is that he's going to hurt you and he's not frightened of anything. It doesn't matter what you do. It's no good getting your punch in because that don't work. You know, your best option is run every time.
In the early decades of the 20th century, there emerged a new type of criminal which had not been seen before in Britain. These villains did not operate on their own, but were organized in gangs, which they called firms and families, and to which they were bound by a strict code of loyalty. They made their money from protectionism and extortion, prostitution and armed robbery, and their power rested on extreme violence. These were Britain's gangsters. Most people in Britain will never have direct contact with the violent world of organised crime. So what's it like, and how do people get drawn into it? Jake Vegas has extensive business interests in pornography. His activities have led him to spending 2 stretches in prison. Vegas started his career in organised crime when he became a so-called runner for a North London firm.
So, how did you get into this kind of work?
Well, it was around 92. I was going through a bit of a depression. I had no money. I was selling all my shoes, all my suits, all my records. It was probably down to the last suit and the last pair of shoes. You know, I didn't wear socks. That's why I don't wear them now, because that's kind of stayed with me. Because once you don't wear socks for a while, you sit down one morning and you think, there's no point. You know, they're just bits of cloth around your feet. It's like absolutely useless idea. Anyway, I was walking around like that, and there was this clothes shop in Islington. I'd just gone out with this girl the night before. Her old man was in the MI5 and I couldn't sleep in the house because he wouldn't accept me because she thought I was a gypsy or something, right? So I used to sleep in her full cortina outside. I got up early, 9 o'clock, walked down the road, and there was this clothes shop, you know, second-hand clothes shop. It was called The Girl Can't Help It or something. I walked in there and there was this bird there. She had huge tits, I mean huge, you know, but they weren't down there, they were outwards, you know, they pointed outwards. And she had one of them Cleopatra haircuts. And at the time, no one was wearing that, you know. So I just used to hang around and say, do you want a cup of coffee? I used to go out and get her sandwiches and all that. But eventually, you know, I was fucking her in the shop, you know, that's the way things communicate. And then, you know, she had another job in a rubber shop. So she said, well, look, this guy's looking for somebody to run up and down. You know, I didn't know what he was on about, run up and down. I thought, what's that? I went there and he says, yeah, you just got to run up and down. said, what? He said, well, when I ask you to go and get something, you go and get something, and then bring it back, and then at the end of the day, I'll pay you some money. So I thought, yeah, that's cool, you know. I thought, you know, I'll write that. You know, all through the day, he bought me fags, he bought me drink, and it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and he said, do you want, you can go now. And he'd give me 70 quid. Right now, in them days, I thought it was, you know, I didn't understand. I said, 70 quid? I thought he'd made a mistake. I said, you give me 70 quid here? He said, yeah, that's right. He says, we weren't very busy today, but when it gets busier, you get a drink on top. You know, so I was getting £100 a day for running up and down the road. They'll put money in your pocket, they'll be nice to you, and then they'll make you do things. They'll make you do things. And somewhere along the line, in your consciousness, you say, I must do this, because you can't get out. There's no other route you can go down.
Mad Frankie Fraser is one of Britain's most notoriously violent criminals, whose career spanned the supposed golden age of British gangsterism in the 40s, 50s and 60s. His involvement in crime began at the age of 7.
I first got involved in crime as a very small boy. Sheer poverty, and plus where I was brought up, literally every other family was into crime. Though my mother and father were two lovely hard-working people, they wasn't into crime in any way. But they were different from everyone else in that sense. And I went out thieving with my sister Eva to try and help my mother and father. We'd nick a load of scrap metal out of an empty house, take it round to the scrap metal dealer, get a few quid for it, and go home and tell my mum we found £2. She'd, being Irish, she'd sling her arms up in the air. Oh, what lucky children I've got. She believed us. We found more money than any other kids alive.
People get drawn into the world of crime for a number of different reasons. Some it's necessity, and over the years it's been that, you know, when the war just finished, you starved to death or you went out and nicked something, you know, and you could actually nick more if you was best mates with someone, and the Perry could carry something heavier, and if there was 5 of you, then you could nick something a bit bigger, so you got firms, you know.
Dave Courtney has confessed to a number of murders in Britain and abroad. He has so many friends in organised crime that he's been called the Yellow Pages of the underworld. Although Courtney blames poverty for encouraging gangsterism in former times, he believes most gangsters are naturally inclined to be bad.
You are born professionally naughty. And naughty is the word, right? Not crime. It starts off as naughtiness, and then you realise that what you consider just naughty and having a laugh is what everyone else considers really, really brave. And you could earn a lot of money at this, you know. And so it is, you know, if you're a slut as a woman, right? If you're a tart, whether you will go to work in the city or you work in Woolworths in Peckham, you're going to be what you are. You might go, yeah, hello, I'm losing £1,000, or hello, babe, how you going? But if you are what you are, I don't know what clothes you've got on, you're a tart. Right? And there's nothing you can do about it. It wasn't anything to do with your childhood, you were just born that way.
So how do you get into heavier things from starting maybe at the age of 7, 8, just thieving?
Well, you then went to a proof school when you did get caught, and then Borstal, and then prison. Well, at proof school and Borstal, I was always in trouble with the authorities. So therefore, your prestige, streetwise, is going up all the time. And then when you was getting older, you was into crime in a very big way. Because all of what you'd done as a young boy stood you in good stead.
It was at a approved school in Borstal that Fraser developed his peculiar brand of people skills, which were to propel him into the world of gangsterism. For it was here that Fraser made a name for himself as a violent psychotic, exhibiting a degree of viciousness that would lead him to being twice certified insane and earning him the nickname Mad Frankie Fraser.
And did you spend a lot of time having to fight people over, you know, to defend your name and things like that?
Not really, no. Once you'd made your name, people were very wary then of upsetting you, because they'd know you'd go the old distance. You'd kill them if you had to. They knew that. So therefore, people were rather laid back about you. They were very wary. But now and again, you did have to really go to town and cut quite a few people.
But Frankie Fraser's introduction to gangland Britain came during a stretch in prison, when his propensity for extreme violence came to the attention of one of the biggest figures in the history of British gangsterism.
The Home Secretary of the day, Herbert Morrison, during the war, he changed me ballstalk into 3 years penal servitude. And I was sent to prison. And that's where I met Billy Hill, the boss. And that was the turning point of my whole career. He really put me in touch with everything and everyone.
Mad Frankie Fraser's capacity for violence was to win him a place among Britain's emerging gangster elite, and took him to what used to be the heart of gangland Britain, the glamorous capital of sleaze, London's Soho. The supposed golden age of British gangsterism began in the 1940s and was based in London's sleazy but fashionable Soho.
Because the sex industry was quite centralised on Soho, that's made it the centre for a lot of criminal activity. Because whoever controlled Soho controlled the clubs, controlled the vice, and to a large extent controlled the gambling.
No, in our day, Soho was controlled. And anybody who wanted to do something they shouldn't do, they had to get permission, literally.
But Soho was too important to be controlled by one group alone. Many gangs operated there, each specialising in different areas of criminal activity. These gangs were typically divided along ethnic lines and strongly reflected the cosmopolitan makeup of Soho. In fact, like their glamorous counterparts in America, many of Britain's leading gangsters came from immigrant groups and brought with them different criminal styles.
French owned all the brothels in the early 40s. All the porn was separate. It was different guys, and all the nightclubs were separate. That was Jack Spot and Billy Hill and all them guys. So it was all separate in them days rather than a conglomeration of everything, you know.
Whereas, where did all these Frenchmen come from?
France.
Well, a good one.
Well, Soho in the 30s, 40s, early 50s was so multinational. That was a good thing. French knew he had an off licence there. And when I got in some trouble and had to go on the run, they sent me to Paris with the French mafia. Oh, it was wonderful. That lovely famous French singer Edith Piaf, they introduced me to her and put me up in an hotel, and got in there about 12 o'clock at night from the club, and there was a knock at my door, and there was this gorgeous French girl there. She undone her coat. I said, come in. It was wonderful. They done it in style.
Back in the old days, there was a guy called Messina, and he was French. And in the late 50s, he worked on the same principle of he used to buy these buildings, and he used to import these girls from France, bring them all over, same sort of thing, and he used to have them working for him, like 5 or 6 buildings. But the way he took it a stage further, the way he used to do it, he used to brand them like cows with his own brand on his arm, so he knew they were his girls and they weren't allowed to work anywhere else or move anywhere or do anything. and they used to send him money, even when the guy was in prison, or if he had to leave the country a couple of times because he had to escape because he'd been done and all that, and they still sent him the money, even in like towards the late 60s and 70s. They were still sending him money, these girls. I mean, that guy was so frightening. The Maltese, they stuck to the clip joints and the strip clubs because I think they liked the idea of, like, that was their thing. I think controlling people, and you know, they were quite rough on people, I think.
Tell us, what's a clip joint?
Clip joint is where someone goes in, someone on a door calls someone down and says live show or something. Someone goes down and there's a menu, you know, like fizzy orange or lemonade, and it's £150. So what happens is the guy buys the Coke or the lemonade and he gets charged £150, which is, I mean, it's genuine. I mean, the guy can see the menu, but you know what I mean? He does buy the orange juice for £150. But the thing is, that's where there's a thin line there, you know. But he must pay because he's asked for it, you know. He's asked for it.
So what gets him down there?
Well, he thinks there's exotic places down there. You know, he thinks that he's going to have an exotic time, or there might be, you know, naked women crawling all around the floor. But it's usually empty. Usually empty with a dwarf taking orders, you know. That's usually what happens.
That's kind of exotic.
Yeah, that's exotic, yeah.
Wonderful Soho. We had that marvellous gambling club, didn't we? Charlie Chester's in Archer Street. We had our machines in there. That club was untouchable. Nobody could create a fuss there or cause trouble. So the proprietor was well pleased. Not only did we get a share out of the machines, we got a little share out of the club as well. So everyone was happy. Because we had our machines in one or two Chinese places as well. And I found them very honourable people. And if any of their numbers cheated on you, they would do it themselves. They would say, no, let us settle it ourselves. And they would.
Although in general there was less violent crime in Britain in the 1940s and 50s than there is today, the gangsters of the time were at least as brutal as they are now.
They didn't fucking care. You know, they came into London and they said, well, look. And they started to take over. These are the Italians and that, you know, the Sicilians, the proper guys, you know. And from Little Italy up the road. But they were the guys, they're the guys that started it all. And they were tough. They were fucking tough, you know. If somebody came on their patch, they'd cut them. In them days, they used to have cutthroat razors. To cut people all the time, you know, all the time up and down that street, people getting cut all day long.
When you cut someone like that, one, you're going out your way to wound them, and two, you're deliberately leaving scars on them so people can see it and what they got it for. Simple as that. Cut them lovely, all round. Try to do one or two eyes if you can at the same time. So you leave them blinded and all if necessary.
You know, they had guns in them days. They were shooting people, you know. I've heard stories of people getting shot and rolled up in carpets and fucking taken out to Southend and dumped in the fucking sea. And someone said, where's he? And they said, he's gone fishing in Southend. That was a big joke.
People have always carried guns. After the war, many had it. Soldiers were coming home with them, keeping them when they should have surrendered them. And you could rob army barracks then and get them right, left and centre. And the Americans, the Yanks, they were terrific. Their soldiers would sell them to you. for peanuts. There's always been guns.
Prominent gangland figures of the time included the notorious Italian gangster Albert Dines, the East End hood Billy Hill, and the Jewish protection racketeer Jack Spot. When Hill and Spot joined forces, they soon became the most feared gangsters in Britain.
Jack Spot came to the front during the war and just after. He cut a lot of people, really. And he teamed up with Billy Hill. They were really powerful.
Billy Hill would own the club. He would rent it out to someone, and then they would run it, and then he would get the money off them. And then if they didn't have the money, then they would come around and get the money off them in whichever way they could get it, you know. And Billy Hill didn't do it by himself, but obviously he had guys to do it all.
One of the main guys who did it was Mad Frankie Fraser, who worked as Billy Hill's enforcer, using terror to maintain Hill's extortion, protection and gambling rackets.
It was involved in gambling when gambling was in its infancy. You had what you call spills, unlicensed gambling places, where you got a lot of money. And at the races, he had all the bookmakers there. He was very, very big in gambling, and a very successful gambler himself.
Jack Spot was more flash than Billy Hill, but Billy Hill was he was in the background. No, but he was the main man.
Billy Hill hit on the brainwave of all brainwaves. Everyone knows what a crematorium is. And Billy Hill had a superintendent in his pocket. And he would get in touch with him, say, Harry, we're about a game of golf in about 3 weeks' time. Harry said, good idea, Bill. He knew what it meant. It meant that evening, the superintendent would go to the crematorium. You couldn't do it today, the rules are more stricter. Warm it up, I'd arrive with the body, sling it in, salute it, and sling the dust out side New Scotland Yard or Wandsworth Prison. It was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. That's where Billy Hill was brilliant.
He was the first and really the last big crime boss who used similar tactics to the mafia. Similar, you know, you could say he was a gangster, he was involved with the rackets and with the extortion, he was also involved in other spin-offs like laundering money. But he actually did also plan and organise major scale heists.
Well, he would put robberies up to us and tell us, plan it with us and I'd do them. A bank or smash and grab raid, which was all the go at the time, and robberies, post offices, things like that. All good stuff. And if there was any violence to be done, I was the ideal man for it. I would go the whole limit. The police say I've killed many men. I ain't arguing with them.
But events were to blow apart the powerful gangland partnership of Jack Spot and Billy Hill and lead to the most notorious battle in British gangster folklore.
Jack Spot got beaten up by a man called Jimmy Wooder and another guy. And he nicked them. He went to the police and he gave evidence against them at the Old Bailey.
This was a time when there were rules to gangsterism, and Jack Spot had broken the first and most important.
In those days, in the 50s, well, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s and the 50s, there was still this kind of hangover from the Italian ideal with the code of silence, a murder. And people didn't grasp. They didn't talk about their own. They wouldn't, it was the worst thing you could do. It was the kiss of death if you was a criminal to have your name besmirched by being associated with, or being called a grass. It really was the worst thing that you could do.
But if you're ever arrested for anything, then you keep your mouth shut. Under all circumstances. Don't matter how serious you've been arrested for. Don't matter if you were innocent. You keep the mouth shut. Simple as that.
Grassing up his gangster pals was to carry a terrible price for Jack Spot, and Billy Hill chose mad Frankie Fraser to make him pay. As a code of honour, grassing was considered the worst offence of all, and during his various periods of incarceration, mad Frankie Fraser was a scourge of police informers.
I will get an electric light bulb, which nobody knew was missing, crush it, and then the bits I crushed I'd give to a friend who worked in the engineer department or something like that, who would really get it crushed. And I'd get it returned and it was like powder. And then I'd somehow get it smuggled into the man's sugar, where then you could buy sugar in the canteen. A big thing it was. And I'd somehow get it in there, and I had quite a bit of success. Tore their guts to pieces, I'm happy to say, without even having to chin them. And they never grasped again. Ever.
So reports that the leading gangster Jack Spot had turned police informer deeply worried his former associate, the East End villain Billy Hill.
Billy Hill got hold of Jimmy Wooder, said, look, you're going round saying this about Spot. What evidence have you got? And there it was in black and white, Jack Spot's evidence against him from the witness box, the prosecution evidence. And Billy Hill had copies made of it and posted up in pubs and clubs all over London. And Spot realised then he had to do something to get his prestige back.
In a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, Spot made a list of leading underworld figures whom he intended to kill.
I'd just come out of Broadmoor at the time, and he made a list of 10 people. I was about number 8. I'll never forgive him, I was right down the bottom, number 8. But he had Billy Hill and Albert Dimes right at the top. And he decided on Albert Dimes. Biggest mistake of his life. Albert was in Frith Street, and Spot come up, hello Albert, and bosh! Stabbed him in the stomach. Most people would have died. So they wouldn't have been strong enough to loss of blood and everything. And the surprise, Albert never had a clue. He recovered, slung Spot off, and run down to a little greengrocer's. And Spot, like an idiot, chased after him, cut him down the back of the head as Albert slung him down. I think he had another 28 stitches in that one.
The fight continued for so long, was so bloody and so public, that it is still remembered in gangster circles as the Battle of Frith Street.
They cut each other like, I think it was 159 times the same, all down the street. Down that street there.
Then somehow, face Spot. He deserved the medal. He somehow got the knife off of Spot and done him with his own knife. He was fighting for his life. And Spot collapsed. Wonderful fight it was.
In the aftermath of the fight, everybody assumed that Jack Spot was finished as a gangster, but he had one more trick up his sleeve.
He got hold of 5 kids, gave them all a gun each, and told them to shoot Billy Hill and Albert. Kids only 19, 20, couldn't keep their mouth shut, boasting about it. We kidnapped them, took the guns off them, and then it was decided that I would do Jack Spot, which I did. I cut him to pieces.
Nick Reynolds is the son of the East End gangster turned great train robber Bruce Reynolds. Nick recently accompanied Ronnie Biggs on his plane trip back from Brazil. Through his father and his father's criminal associates, Nick has learned the importance of the gangster code of honour.
The East End thing was a bit of a hangover from the Italian immigrants. You know, there was a lot of this kind of like elements of mafia meets East End, and you could almost say that the old East End, this is sort of going back to the times of Jack Spotton when Frankie Fraser was just a very, very young lad. The Italians were kind of running things a little bit there, you know, like Albert Dimes and people like that.
And the East Enders soon learned from the Italians the vital importance of trust and loyalty.
You only got into the inner circle, if you like, if you could be trusted. So there was, once upon a time, a very, very strong code, because it was held and bound by the people that were in the inner circle of the underworld as it stood there and then.
Women and children, untouchable. People's houses in the neighbourhood where you live and things like that, untouchable. Nice people who you could go in a pub, the local pub with, or the local club, whatever, untouchable. That is really important, really. And if any of your pals are in prison and you can help them in any way, or their families, by all means, definitely.
There was a very well-defined criminal code of honour. Things that a proper, decent criminal, for want of a better term, would or wouldn't do. And if you offended against this code, you would find yourself ostracised. No other decent criminal would have anything whatsoever to do with you, and quite often if you came in company you would be attacked on sight.
In our world, a code of honour is very important. Vital. Vital. That is the most important rule of all. That code of honour. There's nothing wrote. You don't have to be. You knew. That was it. No one had to swear an oath. You knew. Simple as that. And if anyone abused that code of honour, they were finished. Good as dead.
Another thing the East Enders had in common with the Italians was the tightness of their community.
In the East End thing, it would have been more of a family thing. I mean, the East Enders saw themselves as a separate race, practically, you know. They believed that the government and its rules weren't for them, you know, that society wasn't for them.
Organised gangsterism reached its zenith during the 60s in the East End, with the rise of the notorious Ronnie and Reggie Kray. Helen Keating and Bobby Travers were nightclub entertainers who were close to the Krays and other notorious gangsters of the time. Despite the fact that gangsters like the Krays were vicious, murdering thugs, they nevertheless enjoyed a perverse celebrity status in the East End.
I spent all my childhood in Balance Road, and of course my neighbours were Ronnie and Reggie and Charlie, and I knew the whole family very well, but I knew them as neighbours. Yeah, I've been in the pub with Ronnie, Reggie and everything, and they've seen Guinnesses over by the armfuls to the old people sitting along the benches.
And they was always very quiet, weren't they? It wasn't very flash. They always stood there quiet. And the chap was very friendly with the governor of the Aberdeen, standing in his corner, very quiet, and good night when they used to go out. And when I worked for them in the Double R, everything finished on time, very well, you know.
Business-like.
Very good.
It was
very good.
Yeah.
Where it was good, you was out feeding, getting plenty of money. But in the night time, you was out having a wonderful time, glamorous night. With film stars, politicians, wonderful. And they loved the gangster. Thank God for that. And we loved them.
The thing about the Krays, their imagery, I mean, for anybody out there, what's the message? There's these two guys, they're breaking the rules, but they look the dog's bollocks. And they must be somebody, they're in the papers, they're doing this. For the underdog, these guys obviously were icons.
But behind this naive adulation of the Krays and other gangsters, the grisly business of killings and protectionism and prostitution continued, as did feuds between gangs.
There were rivalries in those days. I mean, a lot of it was very localised, sometimes between families. But between the two big firms of the day, the Richardsons and the Krays, there certainly was very bad blood. And I think if the Richardsons hadn't been nicked and sent away, there would have been quite heavy bloodshed, although immediately after they were shed away, one of their firm was shot dead by Ronnie.
But this time, Ronnie Kray didn't get away with it. The tide was turning against old-style gangsterism. By the late 60s, smarter police methods and draconian prison sentences were blowing apart the code of honor on which the old gangs depended. In 1969, Ronnie Kray went to prison and never came out. By the 1960s, the authorities were determined to clamp down on organised crime. They decided to strike at the elite of British gangsters, the armed robbers.
Anyone who'd done a bank robbery, he'd reached the top of his profession. That is a fact.
I mean, the simple reason why armed robbery was the elite crime was that was the simplest criminal way to get large sums of money.
Norman Parker has had a close relationship with the underworld. He served 24 years for the murder of a fellow gang member and spent the majority of his sentence as a Category A prisoner. He now writes books.
If you could rob a bank for £30,000 or £40,000 in 1960 and you were four-handed, you know, you've got £7,000–8,000 each, which in those days was a considerable sum of money. To get the same sort of money from stealing a lorry or burglary or protection rackets would take you probably a very much longer time. It's hard to say how much anyone had earned in any one year, but there were certain prolific bank robbery gangs. I mean, certainly the Bertie Smalls gang of the late 60s, early 70s, they stole hundreds of thousands of pounds at each robbery.
But in 1963, a robbery took place which was to capture the imagination of the public like none before, and would provoke the authorities to turn their sights on organised crime. The job involved 15 men and a mail train.
It was called the Cheddington Mail Raid, you know, and that's not really inspiring, is it? But the moment they called it the Great Train Robbery and started drawing parallels with Jesse James and Wild West themes, you know, the nation was hooked. Even America picked up on it in the New York Herald Tribune and said, the crime of the century, they will always be in England. But it was the Queen's mail, so it's seen as an affrontage to the Queen. Also, the amount of money involved was absolutely unheard of. At that time, the biggest robbery to date, I think, had been the East Castle mail van raid in 1952, which was 250,000, which was by Billy Hill.
The Great Train Robbery pulled in £2.5 million. Even though the train robbers were armed only with large sticks, the sentences ran to 30 years.
By giving these criminals such draconian sentences, I mean, it was totally unheard of. This also shocked the populace. Even the police thought it was well out of order, giving them 30 years.
The authorities had declared war on the gangsters, and the new threat of very long jail sentences was to have a profound effect.
Most people were terrified, because if caught, he'd go away for a long time.
Bigger prison sentences had a big impact on gangsterism. The threat of spending the rest of their lives behind bars was incentive enough for many villains to give evidence against their gangster pals to escape prosecution. The criminal code of honor that had long been held in such high esteem was rapidly falling apart. For more than 30 years, James Morton was a criminal defense lawyer who represented a number of well-known gangsters, including Mad Frankie Fraser.
There's always going to be a worry that you're going to be betrayed. That's one of the occupational hazards of being a criminal, that somebody is, from your family or friends, is going to grass on you. And obviously the higher the stakes, then the more the risk. And you could never tell whether your long and trusted mate, or even your brother on occasions, wasn't going to turn supergrass and put you in the frame so that he got a 4 or 5 year sentence instead of a 15 or 17 year one. The impact of the supergrass comes in about 1969-1970 when Bertie Smalls, who led a very successful team of bank robbers, was himself arrested, and instead of facing it out and getting a very substantial term of imprisonment, started the fashion of being a supergrass. In fact, he was followed immediately by a number, and this to a large extent broke down the old-fashioned bank robber.
When I was in prison, doing that 20 years, and the first supergrasses come out of the woodwork, I couldn't believe it. Because I was in prison with them all, them who got put away by them. It defied imagination. You know, it really hurt.
One of the reasons that grassing has become more commonplace is that not only are there far more draconian sentences, but the police have got a much wider scope to offer deals. In the old days, if you was involved in a crime, it wouldn't be allowed that you wouldn't be prosecuted at all. If somebody came forward and gave evidence against his co-defendants, he might get a lesser sentence. But what you'll find nowadays is that if somebody comes forward and they are willing to give evidence, they might not even be charged. And not only that, given a separate identity and set up in a separate house somewhere.
And then another supergrass had come out of the woodwork, then another. And it really hurt.
That really changed the face of crime into sort of like how we see it today, really, because there was no honour among thieves anymore.
So the whole structure of crime was changing rapidly.
And it wasn't just the trust that was changing. High-technology security systems and closed-circuit television cameras were making the job of the bank robber virtually impossible. What's more, villains now had to contend with an armed police force.
A major influence of the RA bombing campaigns in our big cities was a rapid response time by armed police units and closed-circuit TV cameras. So anything that was going to be in your face on a city street was a very dangerous operation to undertake.
The police were becoming armed and there was a danger of a shootout, and generally speaking the people who ended up dead on the pavement were the villains.
Obviously policing methods and communications have meant that certain types of old-style robberies just couldn't happen anymore. They tried to do it on the dome. I mean, it was doomed from the start because there's no way the guys would have got away now because of communications and things like that.
Crimes have changed, and stick them up in a bank, you know. 20 years ago, when they only had a little bit of glass and some poor old lady just loaded up your Adidas bag and you went down the till and ran out. And if a copper come down, he chased you down the road with a whistle until he got to the blue phone box and rung up someone, and there was a Wolseley hot on your bum 30 minutes later. Now you've got tills that flick up in the air, helicopters, policemen driving around with machine guns, cameras in the road, in the bank. You know, it's a completely different, so there is no more gangster bank robbers, you know.
By the last decades of the 20th century, High-tech surveillance, armed police units and stiff jail sentences had effectively killed off traditional gangsterism in Britain. Unfortunately, organised crime was to be given a new lease of life with the arrival of drugs.
But you could see a change take place within prison, certainly in the early 70s. Suddenly, student types, middle class types came in who were drug smugglers, who were drug manufacturers. And they'd be sitting down cheek by jowl within a prison situation. And I remember one classic incident. There was the Operation Julie crowd in, who were basically university middle class type people who manufactured a lot of acid. And one guy was watching TV, sitting surrounded by a group of armed robbers who were doing 15 years or whatever. And the Lamborghini Espada came up on the TV screen. And one of the robbers said, "God, what a good car." And one of the young middle-class drug dealers said, "Yeah, I had two of those." And you know he did, because up in his cell there's a picture of him, you know, with two Lamborghini Espadas. And when they started talking to him and find out, well, how much money was generated? And they said, well, we made several £1 million. But the longest sentence for the ringleader was 12 years, and the others got 8 years and 6 years. And you could see the armed robbers thinking, now just a minute, us four got 15 years each for going out and stealing £80,000 between us. These people have got 600 grand, £2 million each, and all they've got is 6-8 years. We're definitely in the wrong game.
I leave my children with what the general public would consider evil, nasty, robbing, smuggling, murdering men, but they look after my children. And I know what their faults are, you know, they rob banks. Huh? But I'd rather have him than some snotty little librarian that I didn't know what his faults were. It was a nonce. You know? So he'd end up under my patio.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly, moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.